The wind hissed through the pine trees, carrying a faint chill that bit at Jay Connor's exposed neck. He stood at the mouth of the newly discovered cave system, the sound of his boots crunching against loose gravel oddly muffled in the approaching dusk. His headlamp flickered, casting a wavering beam of light onto the jagged rock ahead. He adjusted it with a gloved hand, pausing to take in the sight before him. This was what he lived for, the thrill of the unknown, the promise of discovery. Jay took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp mountain air, though it did little to quell the faint tremor of anticipation coursing through him. He had heard the rumors about this cave, but standing here now, at the entrance to something untouched by the common masses, he felt invincible. "Another notch on my belt," he murmured to himself, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the looming darkness of the cave. He leaned down, his fingers brushing the rim of the entrance. The opening was narrower than he had expected, just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The rocks glistened with moisture, and the scent of damp earth filled his nostrils as he dropped to his hands and knees. His shoulders brushed the walls as he inched forward, the sound of his breathing loud in the confined space. Once inside, the passage widened slightly, allowing him to stand. The faint echoes of water droplets hitting stone filled the air, creating an eerie rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of his heart. His headlamp caught the glint of mineral deposits on the walls, shimmering like stars in the suffocating darkness. The deeper he ventured, the more the world above seemed to dissolve. The last traces of natural light disappeared entirely, replaced by the harsh artificial glow of his headlamp. Jay pressed onward, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust and debris with each step. As he descended further into the cave system, a strange unease began to creep in. The air felt heavier, damp and cloying, clinging to his skin like a second layer. He shook off the sensation, attributing it to nerves. "Nothing I haven't handled before," he said aloud, his voice echoing back to him in distorted fragments. Jay's confidence was his armor, his shield against doubt. He had built a reputation on defying limits, on venturing where others hesitated. But there was a fine line between bravery and hubris, and tonight, that line blurred. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and Jay's headlamp illuminated breathtaking formations. Stalactites dripped from the ceiling like ancient daggers, their surfaces slick with moisture. Pools of water reflected the light, their stillness broken only by the occasional ripple. The beauty of it all momentarily banished his unease, replacing it with a swell of pride. "Untouched," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "This is mine." He crouched to examine one of the pools, his gloved fingers grazing the surface. The water was ice cold, sending a jolt up his arm. He stood, shining his light along the walls, when something caught his eye, a patch of muck clinging to the rock. At first glance, it looked like sediment, a thin layer of damp earth. But as Jay approached, he noticed something off. The muck seemed to shimmer faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost imperceptible. He crouched again, tilting his headlamp to get a better look. "Odd," he muttered, reaching out tentatively. Before his fingers could make contact, the muck moved. A shadow darted from the patch, a flash of something organic that lashed out with needle-like precision. The bite came fast, a sharp sting on his forearm that made Jay yelp and stumble backward. His boot caught on a loose rock, and he fell, landing hard on his back. The creature retreated, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. Jay's breathing came in ragged gasps as he scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm. He shone his headlamp around wildly, but the shadows remained undisturbed. His heart hammered in his chest as he inspected the bite. There was no blood, no wound, just the lingering pain and a dull ache radiating from the spot. "Damn it," he muttered, shaking off the panic. "It's nothing, just a bug." But his voice lacked its usual certainty. The unease returned, stronger now, wrapping around him like the stagnant air of the cave. Jay forced himself to laugh, though it sounded hollow in the empty chamber. "Get a grip," he told himself. "You've been through worse." Still, his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his pack and began the climb back out. The passage seemed narrower on the way up, the walls pressing closer, their dampness soaking through his gloves. He emerged into the cool evening air with a sense of relief he wouldn't admit to himself. As he stood at the entrance, looking back into the darkness, a shiver ran down his spine. The thought whispered at the edges of his mind, uninvited and unwelcome, "You shouldn't have come here." But Jay shook it off, turning his gaze to the horizon where the last light of day faded. His lips curled into a smirk. "Another notch," he said, shouldering his pack and heading for his truck. The drive back to Jay Connor's cabin was slow and uneventful. his truck's headlights cutting through the growing darkness as rain drizzled lightly on the windshield. The distant hum of the engine filled the quiet space, but Jay felt oddly disconnected, as if the usual sense of triumph he'd carried after an expedition was dulled. The image of the muck and the strange bite lingered in his thoughts like a shadow he couldn't shake. By the time Jay parked and stepped inside his cabin, the ache in his forearm had settled into a dull throb. He set his climbing pack on the floor, shrugging off his jacket with a wince as his muscles protested. The chill of the cave seemed to have burrowed into his bones, leaving him colder than the cabin's cozy interior should have allowed. After heating a can of soup, Jay sank into his armchair, his spoon stirring lazily as he stared at the flickering flames in the fireplace. His headlamp sat on the table beside him, the battery still glowing faintly. The sound of dripping water, the cave's haunting rhythm, echoed in his mind even as he tried to focus on the mundane warmth of the firelight. "Just a bug," he muttered aloud, echoing his earlier dismissal. "Nothing serious." But as the evening wore on, his body betrayed him. The itch on his arm became maddening, spreading across his skin like 1,000 crawling ants. He scratched absently at first, then more vigorously, peeling off layers of dirt that seemed to linger from the cave. His breathing grew heavier, his muscles tighter, a dull ache blooming behind his temples. When Jay finally crawled into bed, sleep didn't come easily. The sheets felt too warm, the room too small, and the darkness too alive. He tossed and turned, his skin clammy with sweat and his thoughts fractured, running in loops he couldn't stop. The bite pulsed faintly, though there was no visible wound. In the rare moments when he drifted into uneasy slumber, his dreams were filled with shadows. He saw the muck pulsating on the cave walls, its rhythm matching the pounding of his heart. He saw its needle-like appendage darting toward him, faster each time, until it consumed his vision entirely. Jay woke with a start, his chest heaving and the room spinning. He glanced at the alarm clock beside his bed. It was just past 3 in the morning. For a long while, he sat in silence, clutching the edge of the mattress as his pulse steadied. The alarm pulled him from restless sleep at 6 a.m., its shrill tone cutting through the dense fog in his mind. Jay slapped the button, silencing it, and sat up slowly, his body stiff and reluctant to move. His head throbbed with dull intensity, his mouth dry and sticky. He rubbed his arm absently, his fingers grazing the translucent patch that had spread further overnight. "Damn flu," he muttered, shaking his head as if to banish the thought. His pride wouldn't let him dwell on it. He had pushed through worse before, freezing blizzards, grueling treks, moments of near death on precarious ledges. This was just another hurdle, another inconvenience. Standing was harder than expected. His legs felt heavy, his balance unsteady, but Jay chalked it up to fatigue. He stumbled toward the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and avoiding his reflection in the mirror. He didn't need to see the pale, shadowed skin beneath his eyes or the growing translucence on his forearms. The itch hadn't stopped. He scratched at it as he prepared coffee, the bitter brew offering little solace as he drank it in quiet gulps. He paused occasionally, staring at his hands, noticing the faint tremor that wasn't there yesterday. But Jay brushed it off like always. He packed his gear, tightened his boot laces, and mentally rehearsed the day's schedule. The McAllister family had booked a tour, and they would be expecting Clearwater's best guide, not a man sweating through his shirt with a pounding headache. As he stepped outside, the fresh mountain air hit his lungs, cool and invigorating. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined the symptoms. He could still do this. He always could. "Nothing serious," he said, locking the cabin door behind him. The visitor center buzzed with morning activity as Jay arrived, clipboard in hand, doing his best to mask the ache in his body and the fog in his mind. The McAllister family, a father with a bulky camera, a mother clutching a guidebook, and 2 lively children, waited near the reception desk. Mia waved at them with practiced cheerfulness as Jay entered. "Morning, Jay," Mia said, her tone cautious as she watched him approach. "You're looking a little rough. Sure you're up for this?" "I'm fine," Jay replied briskly, waving her concern away. His voice lacked its usual energy, but he plastered on his signature smile as he turned toward the family. "Good morning. Ready for an adventure?" The kids bounced on their heels, excitement radiating from them. "Yeah," one exclaimed, tugging at their father's arm. "Are there bats?" Jay chuckled, the sound grating in his throat. "If you're lucky, follow me, just watch your step." The hike to the cave was grueling. Jay kept his pace steady but slower than usual, his legs dragging as he tried to mask the effort. He pointed out landmarks along the trail, his voice carrying an air of authority despite the growing strain. The mother glanced at him sideways. "Do you do this every day?" she asked, her tone polite but curious. "Just about," Jay replied with a forced grin. "Keeps me sharp." Inside the cave, Jay's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating the glittering rock formations with faint halos. The children darted ahead, their flashlights bouncing across the walls, while the parents followed more cautiously. "This is one of the oldest cave systems in the region," Jay began, gesturing toward a series of stalactites. "These formations took thousands of years to form, shaped by dripping water and mineral deposits." The father snapped photos while the mother guided the children back toward Jay. The narrow passages became more claustrophobic as they delved deeper, the air growing heavier. Jay felt the translucent patch on his arm burn faintly beneath his sleeve, but he focused on keeping the group engaged. "What's down there?" one of the children asked, pointing toward a darker tunnel branching off to the right. Jay's pulse quickened. His mind flashed to the muck, the bite, the darkness that had felt alive. He forced his voice steady. "Just a dead end. Nothing exciting." The group continued, oblivious to the growing discomfort Jay tried to hide. When the tour ended and they emerged back into the sunlight, Jay let out a shaky breath of relief. As the day wore on, Jay's symptoms worsened. The ache in his muscles spread, his headache pounding with relentless intensity. By the time he returned to the visitor center, he felt like he was moving through molasses. Mia's expression darkened as she watched him slump into a chair. "Jay, you need to get something for this," Mia said firmly. "You're burning yourself out, and it's not just a cold." "It's fine," Jay muttered, closing his eyes. "I'll be fine." "No," Mia snapped, her frustration spilling over. "Go to the pharmacy. Pick up some medicine. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Jay sighed heavily but nodded, her words cutting through his stubbornness. He drove to the pharmacy in a haze, the act of walking through the aisles feeling monumental. He grabbed cold medicine and electrolyte powder, barely paying attention as the cashier rang him up. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Jay parked outside Red's Tavern, its familiar neon sign casting an amber glow over the wet pavement. The place buzzed with conversation, but tonight the atmosphere carried an edge, a quiet tension that Jay couldn't quite place. Jay stepped inside, shrugging off his jacket and sinking onto a bar stool with a weary sigh. Rick was already there, nursing a beer and chatting with Shelley Torres. Both turned toward Jay as he sat down. "You look like you've been through the ringer," Rick said, his tone teasing but lined with concern. Jay grunted in reply, signaling to the bartender for a whiskey on the rocks. "Long day." Jay's fingers tapped against his glass, the translucent patch on his arm itching persistently. He drained the whiskey in one go, the burn doing little to settle his nerves. "You all right?" Rick asked, his tone cautious. "You've been acting off lately." "I'm fine," Jay replied quickly. "Just tired. Flu season." Shelley studied him closely, her lips pursed. "You really don't look fine." Jay forced a grin. "I've handled worse."